Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Mike Bell, the Executive Director of the Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy here at the National World War II Museum. Our next session, chaired by Brigadier General Ty Seidule, will look at a wide array of media in a discussion between Ty and Dr. Randy Roberts. And Ty is a Brigadier General, retired from the U.S. Army after more than 35 years of service, Professor Emeritus and former head of the Department of History at the United States Military Academy at West Point. He was also the Dean Emeritus of Innovation. Ty is the creator and senior editor of the 4-volume West Point History of Warfare series, which won 3 Army Historical Foundation Awards for distinguished writing. The series includes a 2-volume West Point History of World War II. A leader in digital history, the enhanced digital version of the West Point History of Warfare won the George C. Marshall Foundation Society for Military History Digital Prize. Ty created an augmented and virtual reality projects on the D-Day invasion. His video lecture he made was called "Was the Civil War About Slavery?" Has already 30 million views on YouTube and Facebook, making it one of the most watched history lectures ever. I should note with Nike, Ty helped design the Army football uniforms at West Point that you've seen. His latest book, Robert E. Lee and Me, was published last year. And he's also a presidential counselor here at the museum and a former comrade in arms of mine. So with that, Ty, the floor is yours.
Oh, Mike, thanks for that great introduction. It is great to see everybody here or there, as the case may be. Anytime I get to do anything with the National World War II Museum, it's a treat for me. I wish I was in NOLA there with Mike, but I want to thank Stephen and Nick and the whole World War II team for letting me be a part of this. I remember when this idea was birthed many moons ago. It's been through a lot of iterations. I'm glad to finally see it come to fruition. So welcome. You're about to be in for a treat. So I'd like to introduce you to my good friend, Randy Roberts. He is the 150th anniversary professor at Purdue University. He is a historian of sports, of culture, and of war. He has won every teaching award that Purdue and the Big Ten give. Over a dozen teaching awards. In fact, this last year, he was a finalist for the very prestigious Robert Foster Cherry Award that goes to the best teacher in the country with an enormous cash prize. He has an author or editor of over 24 books. His latest book was War Fever, Boston, Baseball, and America in the Shadow of War. The one before that was Blood Brothers, The Fatal Friendship Between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, which I recommend you watch, is a Netflix documentary. He has, again, as I said, more than 24 other books. He has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize 4 different times. And in my favorite book of his is A Team for America, the Army-Navy game that rallied a nation. And I got to know Randy when he was the Ewing Chair, the visiting professor of military history at West Point, and we served together there for a year. And I will tell you that he's the finest lecturer that I've ever heard. And with that, no pressure, Randy. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my good friend, Randy Roberts.
Thank you very much, Ty. It's always nice to be introduced like that and set those expectations. I always loved it when I first started teaching because every student that I had was convinced that history was going to be the most boring course, the worst course that they have. And I always felt I like no expectations because it's easier to jump over that bar, I think. And again, my thanks to everybody at the museum, the World War II Museum, National World War II Museum. You guys have been great. This has been a very long campaign, as most of you know, but logistics has not been the problem. They have been just spectacular in what they've done. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about popular culture in World War II, really. Films, music, sports, just an array to give you just a sampling of what's going on in World War II. You know, when I look at wars, particularly America's great 20th century wars, and look at it from a cultural perspective, I see World War I as really a literary war. You know, I think of All Quiet on the Western Front. I think of A Farewell to Arms. I just think of the great short stories of Hemingway and Maddox Ford and all the rest. Movies, novels, poems, essays. But when I think of World War II, I think of a visual war, cinematic, photogenic, movies, photography, television, Band of Brothers, all the all the movies we've seen, John Wayne movies of World War II. So it is a war that in which I think popular culture plays a really decidedly important part. If we can move on to the next slide. Maybe some of you are familiar with the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from fear, freedom from want. Okay, the reality is most Americans, when we were attacked by Pearl Harbor, had no sense of what this war was about. I'm reminded a little bit of the movie. I'm sure most of you have seen Animal House, when Delta gets in all of its problems and it's woe is me in the Delta House. And John Belushi finally has had enough. Bluto, I think his name is in the film. And he says, come on, guys, what's going on here? What, did we quit when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Well, that's pretty close to reality in America. America had no idea what this war was about in many ways. Most Americans, only 13% of Americans could name two or more of the four freedoms. Okay, that classic expression by Roosevelt and Norman Rockwell. Two, that's it. Only 5% of Americans could give a clear ideological reason why America was at war. I mean, think about it. America didn't understand the war. You didn't have to explain to a person in Poland what the war was about, to a person in France or in Great Britain or in the Soviet Union what the war was about. But the war was not fought, as you know, of course, on American soil. It's like explaining, I'm sure Germans and Poles understand what's going on in Ukraine today better than Americans understand because they've been through it. So what was popular culture's role in the war? It was to explain the war. This is a war of imagination. And Hollywood was given a visual film, Hollywood and popular culture, a visible expression to this imagination of the war. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay. We got a little bit of it early on when Joe Louis fought Max Schmeling on June 22nd, 1938. This is a war, this was a battle, a boxing match, a heavyweight championship title fight that was vastly anticipated by the American public and by the German public. Hitler had a real love affair with boxing. If you read Mein Kampf, he talks about boxing and the role of boxing in building up the agility and the aggressiveness and the drive of German youth. So boxing was important. He removed Jewish Germans from boxing early in his administration, shortly after he became chancellor. Within a couple months, Jews were removed from boxing. That's how important it was to him. In 1936, Max Schmeling had upset Joe Louis, who then was only a challenger for the heavyweight crown, but he was undefeated and seemingly indestructible. But Max Schmeling came to America, and as he said, I see something, a flaw in Louis's technique, which he took advantage of and landed repeated right hands and finally knocked Joe Louis out in the 12th round. Exciting fight. Joe Louis was destroyed by it. I mean, not physically, but emotionally. He had lost to this German. Now, in 1938, the political scene had degenerated. Okay, Hitler was moving close to war. The Sudetenland crisis was just right in front of us. And so suddenly now the two fighters are matched in New York. Joe Louis by this time is champion. Max Schmeling wants the crown. Adolf Hitler wants the crown. This will be a fight that will be watched by virtually everybody. Okay, I mean, if you look around, Eleanor Roosevelt's watching the fight, mentions it the next day in her column. Franklin Roosevelt, W.E.B. Du Bois is watching the fight. Schmeling's wife, Anna Andre, is watching it with Joseph Goebbels, the head of propaganda in Germany. Okay, so this is the fight that Germany wants. Hitler desperately wants it. Joe Louis wants it too. Before the fight, one of Joe Louis's aides said to him, Joe, how do you feel? And Joe said, I'm scared. And, if you got a fighter that's going into the ring, saying he's scared is not something you want to hear very well. Okay, so what do you mean you're scared? And Lewis says, I'm scared, I'm frightened, I'm going to kill him. Okay, that's it. Lewis is pumped up for this fight. And he goes out and he just destroys Max Schmeling, knocks him out before the second round. First round knockout. And this was a blow for America. And if we can move to the next slide, let's continue this. One of the things that this was concerned with and why this bout was important, because war was on the horizon. Roosevelt knew it, the world knew it, and America may be dragged into this war. And Roosevelt wanted to go into the war with a unified American people. But think about it. If you're a Black American in 1938 through the World War II, you're going to be asked to fight a war against what? Nazi racism? Well, most Black Americans knew a little bit more about racism maybe than even the President of the United States knew. And so I brought in here a slide. I wish I could play the songs, but I'm told that it somehow would get canceled. Okay, that everything would fall apart, that there's some algorithm which would just take me off the stage, metaphorically. And so I was going to play you a Josh White song. I can see a picture of myself on the screen that is somewhat blocking part of the song. But you can see the verse. It's a wonderful song. He was one of Roosevelt's favorite performers, of blues singers by the name of Josh White. And he goes something like, airplanes flying across the land and sea. Everybody flying but a Negro like me. Uncle Sam says, your place is on the ground. When I fly my airplanes, don't want no Negroes round. Same goes for the Navy when the ship goes to sea. All they got is a mess boy's job for me. Uncle Sam says, keep on your apron, son. I ain't going to let you shoot my big Navy guns. You talk about Freudian interpretation. You don't have to go too far on that one. Got my long government letter, my time to go. When I got to the Army, found the same old Jim Crow. Uncle Sam says, 2 camps for black and white. But when the trouble starts, we'll all be in the same old fight. I think democracy is, if you ask me, I think democracy is fine. I mean, democracy without the color line. Uncle Sam says, we'll live the American way. Let's get together and kill Jim Crow today. Hey, what is his concern? His concern in this battle coming up is for America, for civil rights, for the end of racism, for the death of Jim Crow. Okay. Many Black Americans did not view the coming of World War II as their business. Richard Wright, the great American novelist who would become famous when he wrote a couple years before, when he wrote Native Son, gave a speech in June of 1941 in which he said, it's not my people's war. And he gave an impassioned argument for Black Americans and people from the various empires not to fight in World War II. It wasn't their war. It's not Black Americans' war. Okay, when the war comes, if we can move on to the next slide, when the war comes, America wants to present a united front. Okay, how are they going to do this? Okay, they're trying to say this is a war of all Americans, of men, of women, of Blacks, of whites, of ethnic groups, of Native Americans. We're all in this battle together. Okay, how are they going to visualize it? Joe Louis, who Roosevelt said dealt the first blow to the Nazis. Supposedly Roosevelt and Louis met. I have never been able to confirm this in any White House documents, but it's an apocryphal story that may be true, may not be true, but I think it's true in its meaning. And supposedly Roosevelt felt Lewis's bicep and said, Joe, we're going to need muscles like that to knock out Adolf Hitler. Well, it sounds good. Roosevelt certainly wanted African Americans, Black Americans to participate in this fight. Well, the person that they're going to get is Joe Louis. Okay, Joe Louis becomes the symbol of Black Americans fighting for America. On January 9th, 1942, shortly after Pearl Harbor, Joe Louis fought a fight, had defended his title against Buddy Bear, and he accepted no money. He donated his entire purse to the Navy Relief Fund, which was the most segregated of all the armed forces. And he was criticized by some Black Americans. Others said, it was good. But one person said to Joe Louis, Joe, what are you fighting for nothing for the Navy for? And Joe Louis said, I'm not fighting for nothing. I'm fighting for my country. Okay, that sense of simple patriotism was appealing to many Americans. He then, shortly after, in March, fought a fight for the Army Relief Fund. Okay, the wwII, the Office of War Information, saw this as something that could be useful for Americans, useful for the country. And Joe Louis becomes literally the poster child for racial harmony in World War II, something that didn't exist in reality, but in the American mythology, it does exist. And you see this, I have a poster of Joe Louis. We're going to do, and this is a quote from Joe Louis, we're going to do our part and we'll win because we're on God's side, which he said in a famous speech in New York. Anyway, the importance of this poster, as I see it, is number one, you will see very few posters of Black Americans in uniform. This is something that the South didn't like. Roosevelt always sensitive to that Southern bloc in the Congress, and so you rarely see it. You never see an African American with a gun in uniform in a battle pose. Only Joe Louis could bring about this. Joe Louis, in this attempt to bring about some sort of harmony among the races. Okay.
Randy, I got a question for you. So if you're talking about, you did a great job of talking about Joe Louis, but what about the other industries, like comic books, film? How do those work into World War II?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Ty. If we could move to the next slide, you get anxious. I'm sorry, I go a little slow. Comic books certainly played a part in this war from the very beginning. The comic book industry, centered in New York, was one of the most Jewish-led industries in America. Many Eastern European Jews, Jewish Americans were part of the comic books, the people that were the most sensitive to what was going on in Europe, who had families in Poland and Germany and Austria and Eastern Europe. And so they were very sensitive, and comic books were quick to go to war. There was a comic book war committee that was formed even before the war. And, we see people like March 1941. This is before we're in war, close to 10 months or so before we're going to be at war. We see the birth of Captain America. Okay, here we have this is a comic book by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. That's Jacob Kirksberg was his real name. And this is a guy who's fighting. Look at Captain America. He's knocking out, a rather buff Adolf Hitler. Hitler may have liked that picture of him. I don't know. But yeah, he's giving him a good right hand. And look, he's dressed in red, white, and blue. He looks like he's wearing the American flag. Okay, this was a young boy, Captain America, weak, but he volunteered for an experiment. They gave him a shot of some kind of green liquid. He suddenly became bigger and stronger, tougher, broader. It's an early experiment in steroids, I think. But anyway, be that as it may, he will defend America, as will other comic book heroes through World War II will defend America. Superman wanted to defend America, and there was a great crisis between Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were the originators of Superman. Should Superman go to war? Now, here's a problem. Superman, as you know, has super abilities, super strength. He can fly. He's faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a speeding locomotive. Okay, able to leap on tall buildings in single bound. We all know the story. I watched Superman as a kid. Anyway, the feeling was Superman, if he wanted to, could fly over to Germany, Berlin, and Tokyo and grab Adolf Hitler and Tojo by the scruffs of their neck and bring them back for punishment in the United States. This would demean the very real sacrifices that Americans are going to be made every day in World War II. So what they had Superman do is go, in one of the comic books, he goes down to enlist, right? And he's given an eye examination as Clark Kent. Now, he doesn't go as Superman. He goes as Clark Kent with his glasses and bad eyes. And Superman's X-ray vision malfunctioned, evidently. And he read the eye chart not in front of him, but the eye chart in the next room. We've all done it. We've been there before. It's a common story. It's in the next room. I guess they had different eye charts. I don't know. I can't say one way or the other on that. But Superman flunks. Okay, so instead of going in uniform, he stays in his Superman uniform and fights fifth colonist activities in the United States. This is to say that Superman was involved. Comic books were involved from the very beginning in World War II. Next slide, please. But there was no industry more important to Washington, D.C. than the film industry. This was the glory days for the American film industry. Of a population of about 134 million people, 80 million people went to a movie every week. You know, Hollywood was in its glory days. And certainly, this is a chance to influence people. Even Lenin, Lenin said that the films were the most important art form, okay, because they had the ability to spread propaganda, to influence the thinking, to influence the ideas of so many people. And so, as far as Hollywood was concerned, the film industry had to show the war in a particular light. So Hollywood made a deal, or the federal government, FDR, made a deal with Hollywood. Okay, you have at the top of our information network, we have the Office of War Information. Okay, under the Office of War Information was something called the Bureau of Motion Pictures. Okay, the Bureau of Motion Pictures' job was to get Hollywood to present the message that the FDR administration wanted presented. Okay, so what they did is they made basically a deal with Hollywood. And they said, look, Hollywood, you can continue to make your movies. You can continue to get the stock that you need from us, the film stock, the other things that you need to make the pictures. You can release the pictures. You can make your considerable profit from the pictures, but you have to present our message, the message we want. And the first thing you have to consider about it, for every film, the first question every director, every producer, every actor had to ask themselves is, will this picture and how will this picture help win the war? Okay, so this is what we have. In Washington, D.C., the head of the Bureau of Motion Pictures is a guy by the name of Lowell Millet. In Hollywood, the person who's looking over everything is a guy by the name of Nelson Pointer. Pointer and his group looked over every script. They read every script. They made changes in the script or suggested changes. They saw every movie before they gave the right to release that movie, the seal of approval from the Motion Picture Bureau. They had, at least for the first few years of the war, just enormous amount of power. And what did they want to see in the film? Okay, they wanted to see the presentation of a democratic, liberal world. Okay, that the 30 nations fighting in World War II in World War II were a people who cared. Okay, a people that lived by certain agreed upon democratic, liberal ideas. They wanted to show a home front making sacrifices, small sacrifices that people could make. For example, bringing their own sugar to a party. Buying war bonds, giving up their seat on a train or a bus, planning victory gardens, joyfully paying their taxes. Tax rates got over 90% in World War II. I don't know how happy everybody was with that. I one time told some people in Texas, what should we pay and in taxes? And somebody said nothing. I said, wow, it's great to be back in Texas. Anyway, nice place. Anyway, they wanted strong women. They wanted a multinational front, I meant to say this with the next picture, if we can go to that slide. Okay, here we have the front copy of the Government Information Manual for the Motion Picture Industry. Manuals. Ty probably lived most of his life reading manuals. I don't know if he's read this one or not, but this is long. I don't know, 300 pages or so. I've got a copy of it. I could hold it up and show it to you. But this gave all the do's and don'ts to Hollywood, exactly how America wanted to be presented. This is not a small job. This was a well thought out campaign. And what do they want? Next slide. They wanted our enemies to be dressed up and looking good. Okay. I mean, suddenly we're in a choice of presenting some realities or overlooking, airbrushing some realities that Americans had long believed. For example, Russia was kind of the enemy. That was that communist place. Remember, the Russian Revolution was in 1917. The United States won't recognize the Soviet Union until 1933. And except for Nanushka, there's very few movies about Russia, and most of them are negative, with a few that were made. Now suddenly we want to make Russia look good. Okay, not communism, but Russia. We try to make them, well, look a lot like us. Okay, they have nightclubs, they have industries that are booming. The people are happy. Everybody, Uncle Joe is a benevolent, sort of avuncular type of figure, and so they make movies like The Song of Russia, Mission to Moscow, The North Star. I can't see the one on the side. Oh yeah, I know what that is. That's three Russian girls. And the boy from Leningrad. I don't know. There may have been a sequel for those ones. But these put the best Russia in the best possible light. Not Soviet Union, not communism, but Russia and the Russians. Many of the people that were involved in these pictures will later fall foul of the McCarthy hearings and the UAC hearings. Anyway, so Russia makes to look democratic. We also make, next slide, Great Britain. What do we do with Great Britain? We we don't like it. Drums belong to Mohawk. Let's get rid of movies like that where the United States is fighting Great Britain. Let's get rid of the empire pictures. We want to sort of de-emphasize the empire and the race in Germany, in England. We also certainly don't want to show an England with a class system. So we de-emphasize race, we de-emphasize empire, we de-emphasize conflict with the United States, we de-emphasize a class system in Great Britain, and suddenly you have a much more palatable nation, a much more palatable war partner. We do the same thing, next slide, with China. Okay, China is made to look like a cultured, liberal, democratic country. We don't do a great job with China, to tell you the truth. But, we try. Flying Tigers, a John Wayne vehicle, The Good Earth, of course. This was our most popular image of China. Charlie Chang movies, this whole series of those. What about our enemies? What about, next slide, Japan? And we make Japan look evil, just purely evil. The Japanese come off as inhuman, subhuman, superhuman, but never really human. I mean, John Dower, in his wonderful book on World War II, talks about the racism, inherent racism in World War II, the race war. And this, you can certainly see this in the films. In American films that deal with Germany, for example, in World War II, Germans are sort of divided between two groups. You have good Germans, okay, which are like the American Germans living in Milwaukee or St. Louis. They're good. There's good Germans over there. And you have Nazis. And the Nazis are vile, are irredeemably bad. But there are good Germans. There are no good Japanese in American films. We don't have that, getting some light here. We don't have that dualism. So, this is what they're doing. We also want to be very explicit about things. For example, next slide. Casablanca and Sahara. We're all familiar, I suspect, with Casablanca. Well, this is a World War II crowd, so we're probably familiar with Sahara too. But the Bureau of Motion Pictures, BMP, they didn't get Casablanca. Okay. Rick was too much of a reluctant hero. They liked Laszlo, who was a hero from the very beginning, but not so much Rick. He seemed a little bit selfish. The Bureau of Motion Picture loved Sahara, which shows a real multinational effort to defeat the Axis powers. I mean, you have all these different nationalities coming to bear. You have a German stabbing an Italian by the end of it. I wish I could see everybody. I wish people had in the crowd and I could raise hands who's seen it, who liked it. Anyway, what I'm suggesting here is Hollywood is shaping how America views this war, this battle of imagination. And they were interested in, we want to show no splits in America, no racial divisions, no ethnic divisions, no economic divisions, no gender divisions. And so films that showed American women on the home front were very popular. Few more popular, next slide, than Since You Went Away, with Claudette Colbert, Joseph Cotton, Shirley Temple, Jennifer Jones. What a good picture. It's still worthwhile. And it shows strong women, devoted women that are contributing to the war effort in innumerable ways. But the one thing, unfortunately, that doesn't change are the treatment of Black women. Okay, we have in this picture Hattie McDaniel. Okay, Hattie McDaniel had won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in Gone with the Wind. She played a maid. She's still playing a maid. She's still dispensing wisdom. But it's problematic. One thing, here's what Hollywood did. The Bureau of Motion Pictures said, okay, you can't show African Americans, Black Americans in any demeaning way. Okay, you can't have the step and fetch it characters. You can't use the dialogue, the patois that American whites have become so familiar with in the movies. You can't show evil Black Americans in films. So what does Hollywood do? Hollywood decides, we'll just write them out of the picture. Okay, if we want a bad guy, we'll have a bad white guy. Okay, we'll have a bad something else. And so one of the problems that Black actors had in the 1940s is getting a job of any sort. Hollywood didn't want to show particularly good sides. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, I can't move out of Hollywood. What do I have next? I can't move out of Hollywood without saying a word about John Wayne. I wrote a long biography of John Wayne, interviewed numbers of people, enjoyed writing about John Wayne. I like John Wayne movies. John Wayne, when the war broke out, was 34 years old, had married, 3 children, another child on the way, a mistress, divorce in the works. And in 1939, he had kind of emerged as a star. After about a decade in B pictures, he made Stagecoach with John Ford. And then he made a couple other pretty popular films before the war. He was not at the top of the game. I mean, he was not a Spencer Tracy. He was not a Cooper. He was not a Earl Flynn. He was not a Jimmy. Anyway, and Stewart. He wasn't a Clark Gable. He wasn't there. But he was almost there. It's just a step below. So he was presented, as were other actors, with a decision. What do we do? Do we enlist, as Henry Ford did, as Clark Gable did, as Tyrone Power did, as other great actors did? Or do we make pictures? One of the things that Hollywood got from the government is if you were working on a picture, you could get a deferment. So John Wayne decided, rather than go into the service, is to accept the deferments and make movies. During World War II, John Wayne will make 13 movies between 4 studios. He will be a sailor and a soldier. He will be a CB driver and a cowboy. He'll be a Pittsburgh steel magnate and other roles. Okay, he comes to exemplify the American hero, the American war hero during World War II, a war that he didn't fight. Now, I don't want to get too negative on this. As John Wayne's secretary told me when I was writing this book, if John Wayne knew he was going to be John Wayne, he would have enlisted. But as far as John Wayne knew, is if he enlists, he's going to be out of pictures for 4 years. He's going to be returning. He's going to be close to 40 years old, and he's probably lost his window to become a leading man. Okay, I just wanted to mention John Wayne before we go on. The one picture that I did, if we can go to the next slide, that I did want to mention, 1942, 6 Academy Awards, including Best Actress, Best Film, and Best Director, and Best Screenplay, a bunch of the big awards. Mrs. Minerva, which is a wonderful war film, particularly for America, really just getting into the war. This presents the best view of British society. You know, it de-emphasizes the class. It shows, supposedly, it says in the film, a typical English family. That is to say, if a typical average English family lives in Beverly Hills, this is exactly what it portrays, because the house looks like it's out of Beverly Hills. But this is about the war coming to England, about Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk. And at the end, a minister gives a rousing sermon talking about there had been a blitz attack, bombs had been dropped, number of the leading characters had been killed in it. And the minister says, look, okay, we have buried our dead. Now it's time to fight. Let me explain to you what this war is about. This war is, and this is straight out of the Bureau of Motion Pictures manual, a people's war. This is a people's war. It is fought by the people. So now let's fight it. And I mean, it's a rousing ending. If you have not seen Mrs. Minerva, you should see Mrs. Minerva soon. The government wanted Mrs. Minerva played for everything. Okay, Ty, where are we?
All right. Well, I want to know, now you've talked to me about film, you've talked to me about comic books, but what about music? We know over there was a big one, World War I. All the divisions had their own songs, but what is the deal with World War II in music?
Okay, and I am running out of time here, and so I'm going to abbreviate music. I really wanted to talk about football in World War II. But anyway, let me talk about music for a second. Let's go on to slide. The idea of music was, and let's go to the next one. I won't belabor that. The idea of music was, okay, we want a patriotic song. We want something that expresses what America is all about, expresses our war ambitions. There was an organization, the Music War Committee, and it looked for, what it wanted was another Over There, a rousing song. And they're not getting it. They're getting songs like, Goodbye, Mama, I'm off to Yokohama, and send a big salami to your boyfriend in the Army, and he'll bring back the bacon to you, and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy from Company B. And they're really looking for a song that expresses the mood of the American people. And what they find from a very unlikely source is a song called White Christmas. At a time when Americans were fighting in North Africa and on Guadalcanal, fighting in hot zones in the world, suddenly this song about Christmas, unpredictably, rises to the top of the charts and keeps going up and up and up. This will become, White Christmas will be the leading hit song in 1942, 1943, 1944, 1945, 1946. Whoa. It will sell over 125 million copies. There's a great picture of Hitler with his Nazi pajamas on, with swastikas on, sleeping, dreaming of a white Christmas when his troops were stalled in Russia. And so, I mean, this is a song, the covers of this song, from Sinatra to Lady Gaga, from Elvis to Alvin and the Chipmunks, everybody covered this song. And look at it. First of all, it has a verse. The first verse was, nobody ever sings hardly. It's, the sun is shining, the grass is green, the orange and palm trees sway. There's never been such a day in Beverly Hills, LA, but it's December the 24th, and I am longing to be north. That's not familiar to many people. And then, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, and on, and you're familiar with it. I'm dreaming, which means the person's not at the white Christmas. They're gone. It's a song that rings a lot of American bells, sleigh bells, and snow, kind of a New England Currier and Ives Christmas, a Christmas that's just absolutely perfect. In this song, Robert Frost, Americans become attached to it, and it's a song that brings about a certain unity. I mean, here is Irving Berlin, a son of a cantor from the Imperial Russia, from the Siberian Imperial Russia. And he's come to the United States, Jewish. And this is a song about Christmas, but yet in no sense does it mentions the nativity. And it's one that attracts people. And this kind of, in World War II, you have the emergence, I won't go into detail on this, of the Jewish Judeo-Christian tradition, which shows a unity. And I won't go on to that. What's my next slide?
Well, hey, Randy, I wonder how much more you want to do on music, or because I can't wait to hear about sports.
Okay, let's just say this about music. The great songs are songs of restoration. What America wanted was what America had before the war. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. I'll be seeing you. It'd be so nice to come home for you too. We'll meet again. A song. Okay, let's say a word about sports.
I got to hear you talk about it, because nobody talks about sports and sports history better than you do. So I got to know about
a couple. I promise I'll do it in just 3 minutes or something. Okay, what do we do about sports in World War II? We're leaving some actors on the home front. And these are guys that look like they should be fighting wars. Leading men are leading men. They're supposed to go to danger, right? They're supposed to go to where the sound of battle is coming from. What about guys that are 18 to 22 years old? Okay, how do you field a football team in World War II when these guys should be fighting? Okay, we have a guy, we come up with a program. The Navy does this, not the Army, but the Navy comes up with a program headed by a guy named Thomas Hamilton, and came up with it. We can have there, called the V12 program. At first, there were a couple different Vs, but they were organized under V12 finally. V12 program said, look, in this war, we're going to need a lot of junior grade officers, a lot of ensigns, a lot of lieutenants to fight this war. Okay, and they're going to Marine lieutenants and Army lieutenants, and they're going to get pretty well hurt. So we're going to need a lot of them. We need to train them. Where are we going to train them? They need some college courses. They need some other courses. We'll train them in colleges. Okay, so you have two programs. Navy V12 programs and Army Specialized Training Programs, ASAP. The Army says, no, you're training for war and that's it. You cannot play a varsity sport while you're training in a college. V12 program says, yeah, you can do it. You can do it. You can play a sport. So you have, 250 roughly Army programs, a little bit less than 150 Navy programs. Schools with Army ASAP programs, a lot of them gave up sports, because they couldn't field a varsity team. If you had a Navy or Marine V12 program, you could turn out a great team, okay? And 1943, I'm from Purdue University. I have to mention Purdue went 9-0, undefeated. Should have been national champions. They had a great V12 Marine program. what this allowed people to do is to move from one school that maybe didn't have the program you wanted to another school. This is the original the portal that we're talking about today. This is a transfer portal. You could transfer. Purdue had only one returning player coming back from 1942 team to 1943, but they had a bunch of great guys, including some All-Americans from Iowa, a bunch from Missouri, some from Ohio State, other schools. They field this program. They go 9-0. Should have been national champions. Another V12 Marine program at Notre Dame with some losses on their record won the national title. We all know what that's about. We've seen it before. But the best school was Army. Okay, because if you're, and we can get, let's go to the Army. Let's go. Okay, Red Blake, you want to build an Army team? It's great. You can offer good players. You can say, come to Army, train to be at Army to be an officer, where they train the best officers. They reduced their training program, the Army program, to 3 years. But you have 3 years that you can train before you're going to go to war. And by the way, you can play football. And so what we have at Army is the building of a juggernaut. Let's go to the next slide. We have people at Army like Barney Poole, All-American. Now, let me tell you, Barney, here's what he did. 1941, Barney starts, he's a Mississippi, from Gloucester, Mississippi. He starts playing for the freshman team in Mississippi, plays varsity in 1942. 1943 V12 program, he plays at the University of North Carolina. The Army sees this guy and says, we want him. So in 44, 45, and 46, he plays on national championship teams at Army. Then in 47, he goes back to Mississippi because he still has eligibility. The Army didn't hurt his eligibility. 47, 48, that is 8 years, 7 varsity seasons. He plays college football. We have Tex Calder coming from Texas. Oh my goodness, he was a monster. When the whistle sounded to end the play, Tex sort of interpreted that as you might start thinking about ending the play. He was going to be hitting after the whistle every time, and he just knocked people out. And then you have the incomparable that I could talk all day about, Glenn Davis and Felix Blanchard. Of course, 1944, I wish I could go through the season. I wrote a book about it. The Army-Navy game, number 1, number 2, 7 of the 11 All-Americans from that year play each other in a thrilling game in Baltimore that is won by Army. Okay, that's it, Ty. I'm over time. I'm sorry. I apologize to everybody that's listening.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that you finished this lecture with Army winning the Army-Navy game. And I just want to give you 1,000 bonus points for doing that. And Mike, back to you.
Hey, Randy, the first question's on popular culture and kind of gaps. What aspect of the American war effort do you think has not received its due in pop culture?
Oh, it's really easy. If you look at particularly comic books and you look at movies, you get the sense, honestly, that this war is being won by Americans, okay? By white American men are winning the war. Comic books paid virtually no attention to what the Allies were doing. You're not going to read comic books and find out what's happening on the Eastern Front. The sacrifices that the Russians were making. You're not going to see what's happening in China and the number of Chinese that are dying in this war. So to me, that is, and in movies the same way, that's the greatest distortion of the war.
Oh, that's great. And related to that, in literature, what do you think is the great American novel about World War II?
I'd have to go with Jones's. I'm drawing a blank. From Here to Eternity. From Here to Eternity. But my favorite war novel is I'm drawing a blank. But about Sam Damon. Everybody knows
Once an Eagle.
Once an Eagle. is my absolute favorite. I mean, that's only part of that's in World War II. You have World War I in it, you have Vietnam in it, but the longest is World War II. I love that. Anton Meyer's book. I think it's a fantastic book. And Norman Mailer, a lot of people like his as well.
And then now, are there cases where you think popular culture has really hindered our understanding of the Second World War?
Yeah, I mean, I would relate that one to the first question. I mean, those are excellent questions. And probably kind of the heroism that you see. But World War II, you saw a lot of heroism, but sometimes it made things seem too predictable. The outcome, you knew what the outcome was going to be, where there was so much more contingency and so much more really drama in the war. And I've never seen a really good movie that dealt with Nimitz, for example, and some of the command decisions that he had to make, the decisions at Coral Sea and at Midway, where he, had to go on limited evidence and take some extraordinary risks.
The next question is about Disney, and what was Walt Disney's role during the war?
Oh, huge amount in Hollywood. Making cartoons that dealt with cartoons be used for training, cartoons that be used for America's purpose, to get America to support the war effort. So the Disney studios played a central role in Hollywood's treatment of the war.
And then related to African Americans' treatment in making World War II films for years, why do you think it took Spielbergs and Hanks until 2020 to include African Americans as they did in Greyhound?
That's a great question. And of course, if you boil things down enough time, I mean, we're coming down to race, okay, is that, Hollywood viewed for years and years and years that they would show kind of a company or a platoon that, you would always have the stock people that showed ethnic diversity. You'd have a Tex, and you'd have some guy from an Italian from Brooklyn, and, some good Midwestern kid from Iowa. But the units would always be white. And of course, in World War II, most of the fighting was done in segregated units. So, it's why most movies made by Hollywood didn't touch race and didn't deal with racial themes and didn't have black actors in the films, except as kind of stock characters or side characters. But, I love that Tom Hanks movie. I thought it was a really, really good movie. But again, I mean, of all the units that had the greatest problem, it's the Navy. I mean, there was very little that the Navy that an African-American male could do in the Navy except be in a service position.
Yeah, the next question is about other depictions and the depictions of dead American soldiers. Can you talk about how Life magazine really came to end its taboo in 1943 to publish photos that showed dead American soldiers?
Well, I haven't studied that. I know that's true, and I haven't studied that. But I suspect you're showing death, and there was a sense that death should have a certain anonymity to it. That when you showed faces, when you showed who the person was, that it could be a demoralizing factor, as well as a factor that led to a greater participation and a greater energy. That's about all I can say.
That's good. And this next question is, how do you think the Vietnam War transformed the way World War II was represented in popular culture?
Well, certainly Vietnam films are kind of interesting. I mean, you had some Vietnam films in the late 60s, okay, Coming Home, Go Tell the Spartans. a spate of other films, 67, 68. Then you went almost about a decade to Apocalypse Now and some films that come out in the late 70s. So for a great deal of time, there were no Vietnam films. And then there was a whole spate of anti-Vietnam War films. Okay. I'm trying to think. During that same period of time in the 70s, it was not a really fertile decade for World War II films, though there certainly were some. The most World War II films that were most popular during the Cold War years before Vietnam went south.
Yeah, and one more question. This one's on.
If I can add one other thing here.
Yeah, of course.
There's been some significant writing, some really good writing, dealing with Hollywood and the Defense Department. And one of the things that Hollywood wanted is when they made films, they wanted ships, the use of ships film. They wanted weapons. They wanted to make their films look authentic. And so the Army would say, okay, we can provide you with what you need, but we want some sort of script approval. Okay, it's a deal. We'll give you what you need to make it look authentic, but you've got to kind of bend your interpretation and present us, the Army, the way we want to. That relationship starts to really break down during the early 1970s and mid 1970s.
And Randy, isn't that? Let me just ask one question. Randy, yeah. Isn't that the reason why Clint Eastwood ends up going with the Marines, and why some of his movies aren't about the Army, even though he served with the Army, because the Army wouldn't allow him to write what he wanted to write.
Yeah, the Army is, they're sticklers about that. They wouldn't let football players play football either. So yeah, that's certainly possible. I mean, that's certainly correct.
And the last question here: why do you think World War II has such strong staying power in pop culture, and do you think that will continue in the future or not?
I heard some discussion today about the Good War. And, I never thought that Studs Terkel, when he wrote his book, The Good War, meant it serious. I think it was ironic. And so I would agree with people, there is no such thing as a good war. But I would also say, I think there's such a thing as a just war. And I think World War II, at a macro level, showed America at its very best. I mean, we went to Europe not as conquerors, but as liberators. And the end result of World War II internationally was good. And this is being drilled home every night, every day, 24 hours a day with what's going on today in the Ukraine. So I think that this essential truth of World War II has become ingrained in the popular imagination. Now, it can be overdone. There's certainly things that we can look at that does not show America in the best light. But at a macro level, that America came as liberators, that we left afterwards, resonates and continues to resonate.
And Ty, as the chair, any closing thoughts that you want to just highlight real quick?
Well, I do want to ask, since I'm going to take the chair's prerogative, I got a minute. I want to ask one other question of Randy, and it's something that he's working on now. What about the Black entertainers, Randy, like Lena Horne, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday?
Yeah, ultimately, African Americans, Black Americans did back the war effort, not at first. And so you had a series of just really spectacular, Paul Robeson, Joe Louis, Lena Horne, all performing and doing their part for the war effort. But there was a certain amount of suffering after the war that they experienced. But certainly Black Americans played a very important part, and I think that there, to a certain degree, it was instrumental in a key moment that led to the civil rights movement in the 1950s. Soldiers coming home saying, hey, we want how about a little love in our own country? We just battled Nazi racism abroad. How about doing something valuable at home?
Well, on that note,
thank you. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you, Randy, at both inspirational, educational, and entertaining. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
thanks to both you and Ty. You know, it was a great discussion on the war and popular culture and certainly enlightening. Quick wrap up on this day of the Memory Conference. Thanks to our sponsors, the ABMC, the American Battle Monuments Commission, EA, Respawn, Entertainment, and Oculus by Meta. We hope you enjoyed the sessions today. They were certainly provocative, incredibly insightful, and we've got more ahead for you tomorrow.